All right, good evening. I'd like to call to order the meeting and welcome you to the regular meeting of the Milwaukie Planning Commission. Agendas and additional copy of staff reports are available on the city website at www.milwaukieoregon.gov. You may locate them by navigating to the community calendar where tonight's meeting page is posted. If you haven't reviewed the agenda, please do so now. It contains important information about the process. Our first order of business is our native lands acknowledgement. The city of Milwaukee respectfully acknowledges that our community is located on the ancestral homeland of the Clackamas people. In 1855, the surviving members of the Clackamas signed the Willamette Valley Treaty, also known as the Kalapuya Treaty, with the federal government in good faith. We offer our respect and our gratitude to the indigenous people of this land. Moving to our second order of business, Planning Commission meeting minutes. Can we get approval of the minutes from the January 24th, 2023 meeting? Does anyone have any corrections to make?
I'd like to make a motion to accept the January 24th, 2023 minutes as presented.
We have a motion on the floor.
I'll second that.
It's been seconded. All those in favor? Aye.
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 Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. 3.1 informational items. Are there any informational items from staff?
Well, I just want to remind everybody that we have one seat coming open on the Planning Commission, and the city is currently seeking applications for all of our boards and committees across the city, and we happen to have one seat open here on the Planning Commission. Commissioner Losfeld has committed to re-upping for a second term, so we're really glad to hear that. But if anybody out there in the audience has any questions about what it's like to be a planning commissioner, you're welcome to contact me, Laura Weigel, or any of the planning commissioners. And I hope we get some really good applicants across the whole city for all of the boards and commissions.
And that is from A to T, from Arts Committee all the way down to the Tree Board. You can be a part of any board. Just fill out your application by April 1st.
And you can do that at milwaukeeoregon.gov/BC, as in boards and commissions.
There you go.
What would I do without this planning commission to help me out? See, it plays such a good role.
Any other informational items from staff?
Not at this time.
No. Any sweets tonight? We were treated on Valentine's Day. Okay. Well, we'll move on to 4.0, audience participation. This is an opportunity for members of the public to comment on items that are not on tonight's agenda. Does any audience member wish to comment on an item not on the agenda? If you're participating virtually, please raise your hand on Zoom, or dial *9 if you are calling in to indicate that you wish to make a comment. Before you testify, please remember to state your name and spell it for the record.
We don't have any attendees
Great.
virtually.
All right, we'll move on to 5.0, the Community Involvement Advisory Committee. At this point of the agenda, the Planning Commission will act as the Community Involvement Advisory Committee. Does staff have any updates? Do CIAC members have any updates?
I do not have any updates at this time. We're working behind the scenes on the items that we've discussed, some training materials, and we will give you an update when we get a little bit closer with those.
And my hope is that during this time that we have invited our land use chairs to join us for our March 14th work session item, draft housing production strategy.
Well, I would like to amend that because we're actually not going to do that on March 14th.
Oh.
It's the only item on the agenda that night. Now, we could convene and do that if you all want to, or I can move it to a later date.
So you're asking us if we could have...
I had moved it because I was hoping that there would be more than one item on the agenda so that we can kind of do everything more efficiently for your time. But if there is a desire on the part of the commission to still meet on that night, we can still do that.
I will leave that up to the Planning Commission to decide when we convene, but I still would like, as a CIAC, to invite our land use chairs whenever that meeting happens.
Perfect.
Sorry, I'm trying to look at something really fast. So if we weren't meeting on the 14th, we would push that to the 28th?
Well, actually, we don't have anything on the 28th either. We're talking about maybe pushing it out until April or May.
Okay, I'm all right with that. I was just thinking the 28th is, I think, spring break, and so
Okay.
wanted to just make sure we were being thoughtful if we'd even have quorum, so.
We do not have a meeting.
Okay.
We don't have anything scheduled for the 28th.
Any thoughts from Vice Chair Freeman or Commissioner Edge on moving that item from the 14th to a to-be-determined future date?
I'm always excited to talk about housing production strategies. I would show up for a special meeting just for that topic, but I'm also okay if the commission wants to wait until we have other things to do. Either way, I'd be happy.
I would say it would be most efficient just to wait. I would say just to wait until we have something else and get it all over once.
Great. Well, it sounds like we will wait on that. Do any members of the Community Involvement Advisory Committee have anything they want to report on? Hearing none, is there any audience members that wish to speak with the Planning Commission? No. All right, well, we can move forward with the agenda. We don't have any hearing items this evening, so we will move into work session items. We have a slight agenda change. We're going to be having 7.2, our parks briefing, occur first. This is the parks briefing, which will be introduced by staff. Welcome Parks Development Coordinator Adam Moore for his presentation.
Well, good evening, Planning Commission. This is my first time here. I've met some of you. Just to introduce myself, I am the Parks Development Coordinator here at the City of Milwaukie. I've been here since October of 21. I have about 12 years of experience as a planner, mostly in environmental parks and open space, but I also have a little bit of experience as a land use planner and a planning manager. Tonight, we're just going to give you some information about the journey that we've been on to develop Bowman Bray, Belfour, and Scott concept plans. As you may be aware, the city received some ARPA funding, that's American Recovery Plan Act dollars, AKA COVID stimulus dollars, to revise the Bowman Bray and Belfour plans, write a new plan for Scott Park, and develop them all by October of next year. So I'm going to talk a lot about our community engagement process that we've went on, kind of touch on our concept plans, talk a little bit about next steps. We expect that our full land use applications will be turned into the city in April, and we expect to be back here for those topics in May of this year. So this is just to talk to you a little bit, give you a sneak peek of what you're going to see in May. Okay, so talking about community engagement, this project was an opportunity for the city to test out some of its strategies to involve new people in the process, as well as to do some intentional engagement around historically marginalized groups to meet the city's goals for diversity, equity, and inclusion. In order to do that, we worked with our consulting team to build a public involvement plan with members of the Equity Steering Committee and our Parks and Rec Board. We did that in March of last year. That plan called for us to have multiple layers of engagement and opportunities for the community to see what we were doing, to provide a great deal of transparency and opportunities to get involved. We decided to run that primarily through the Parks and Rec Board through monthly updates. Those updates were recorded and posted online. Members for the Library Board and the NDAs that were affected by this project, so that's Historic Milwaukie, Lake Road, and Ardenwald Johnson Creek, they were invited to pick out representatives to the PARB member and provide information to their groups. We also attended our neighborhood association meetings in September, just to put some emphasis on the planning meeting and engagement period that we had in October. Some information came up at the last minute, so we also attended Ardenwald Johnson Creek in November. On top of that, we did city council updates at work sessions. Those were January, June, September, and November. The final opportunity for engagement was the presentation to the Parks and Rec Board on November 16th. I know that some of you were able to attend that. And then they went to City Council on December 6th of last year, where they were unanimously approved. Each of the parks had their own individual planning process. Scott Park, you may remember, had a plan from the 1990s. That plan was rescinded prior to the development of the letting library process. The community and the Parks and Rec Board in particular wanted to see Scott Park have its own intentional planning process. And so that started in May of last year with an open house in the park. Over 200 people attended that. We followed up with planning meetings in August and October. Bowman Bray and Belfour, you might remember, had plans that were adopted. And at that time, we were following the ordinance process and adding plans to the comprehensive plan. Those were approved in 2015. Those were primarily done by NCPRD with the city in partnership. That's North Clackamas Parks and Rec District. Bowman Bray and Belfour each had their own open house in the summer of last year, and those were followed up by planning meetings in October. Each of these rounds of engagement were conducted in a way that they also had the same surveys that we were doing at the meetings or at the open house. Those were online. And we notified people of these engagement opportunities by postcard, through the pilot newsletter, on the community calendar, and via email. So lots of different ways to get involved. Some of our postcards did go as far out as the full 97222. Had to make sure I get that right because I live in 202. And then also we did cover some postal carrier routes in the UGMA. We had heard in that public engagement plan process that we wanted to make sure that we included people in the UGMA. We would have included the entire park district, but that would have blown our budget really early on. On top of all that, we did some intentional engagement through focus groups. We had 3 separate focus groups, as well as a round of interviews. Those were with our Spanish-speaking community, our BIPOC community, and people with disabilities. That was at the direction of Planning Commission. Not only did we talk about kind of the basics of what sort of amenities do you want to see in parks, we also talked about experiences that people wanted to have in parks, experiences they didn't want to have in parks. And we got into kind of some of those nitty-gritty, more intimate conversations on parks. Some of those went nearly 2 hours and really provided a great deal of information on not only how we think about these 3 parks, but our system-wide park planning that we may engage in the future and how we develop other parks in the future. Overall, we received a total of 361 surveys, both online and in person. 27% of those were from people who identified themselves as new participants to the Milwaukie planning process. 8% came from people who identified as more than one race or as a BIPOC community member. Now, do need to acknowledge we had 3 parks and multiple engagement sessions for each of these. So a lot of those 631 surveys came from the same people. Best way that we had to track how many people participated were through sign-in sheets and through email addresses. And we were somewhere around 311 people that we were able to engage. We also did a number of pop-up engagements. So attending the Friends of the Letting Library book sale on a Sunday to talk about Scott Park, or providing some engagement opportunities at the Juneteenth celebration that we did as a city. We also did some information, gave out some information there.
Just quick comment and a question. Want to comment and say, I think the engagement's been phenomenal. I personally participated in some of that, and want to just put a fine point on that. 27% new participants, people who haven't participated in planning processes. That's a pretty big accomplishment that you all should be really proud of. The question was, just for any YouTube viewers out there later, what does UGMA mean?
Oh, sure. So our urban growth area. boundary. So places that could annex into the city into the future.
Okay, thank you.
And, you know, what I think, just to your point, what we were seeing early on in the process through those open houses, we were seeing greater percentages of new people participating. So at the Belfour planning meeting in Belfour Park, the neighborhood association put together a plan on their own prior to the 2015 plan that was adopted. At that open house, we had nearly 70 people at that meeting, and 45% of them identified as new to the planning process. So, you know, that was part of the strategy, is to have these family-friendly, fun events with lots of food and face painting, and talk about, hey, what should we put over there in the park? So this is a look at the concept plan for Bowman Bray. It is very, very similar to the 2015 plan in its amenities and layout. This is a little bit slow here, but we did add to the 2015 plan. Community members were very clear that they wanted to see a swing set in the play area. They wanted us to add a pollinator garden, which we have done. One thing to keep in mind about this image is that the top of the slide is the west and the right of the slide is the north. It's just how it situates on a page the best. But we do have a pollinator garden and a play log up in the upper right-hand corner. That is the northwest corner of the park. We added in a drinking fountain to the picnic shelter. There will also be electricity in the picnic shelter. We know that the neighborhood association, a lot of community members are interested in programming there. That will allow that to happen. One of the things we heard from neighbors and people in our focus group with people with disabilities is that Bowman Bray Park isn't served very well by sidewalks. And a lot of the properties around Bowman Bray are outside of the city limits right now. So we don't have any control over the conditions of the streets or the sidewalks right now. And so adding in a drop-off area along Bowman Street was really important to people, to make sure that people who have some mobility concerns or use a mobility device were able to get to the park. But by and large, this property or this plan is the same. You have the nice long perimeter path around the outside, the rain garden up in the corner, the picnic shelter and the play area are in the same location. The acquisition of the property between the park and Where Else Lane there, you see that little bit of path going outside of the yellow line at the top of the page there. So we are acquiring property to match the right-of-way of Where Else Lane. That process has started. We still have a few more steps to go through, so I don't know what the timeline on that acquisition is, but we do expect that this park will move forward on time and will be complete by October 2024. And we should have that acquisition complete well within time for construction. The play area that you're seeing here is conceptual. We will be working with some community groups, including the Parks and Rec Board, on playground design. And right now we're going after a few grants to provide enhanced playgrounds at all three of these parks. If possible, we will try to enhance the safety surface to a unitary safety surface, as referred to. A rubberized tile is the one that we kind of prefer. And that's much more accessible for people with mobility challenges or a mobility device. This is Belfour Park. Belfour Park does have some changes from 2015. The paths and the lawn have changed. In the 2015 plan, this center lawn here in the middle there where it says open lawn, those trees that you're seeing in there outlined in white, those were actually cut down in the 2015 plan, and community members were very clear that they wanted us to protect the trees on site and add more. So we rerouted our paths and changed that center path, which is in brown in the plan. That is a soft surface trail now to protect those trees. We also added in some rock hoppers over the bioswale to create a little bit of a shortcut here, if my mouse will work with me here. In between the open lawn, out over that bioswale, we have some nature play features. There's some rock hoppers. This park will also feature a drop-off area. I do want to mention that Belfour Street is scheduled to receive a Safe Streets project that will go in 2025. So everything that you're seeing in the right-of-way there, the sidewalk, the drop-off area, and those trees, those will go in after the park with that fully redone Belfour Street. In 2015 and in the neighborhood association plan, there was a community garden where you're seeing that picnic shelter and the water table. We replaced it with that shelter and water play table. The shelter was extremely popular in our community engagement. And we're also paying for this with COVID funds. And a big part of developing these undeveloped parks with these funds was to make sure that people had a safe place to recreate outside. The water table is a callback to the neighborhood association plan prior to the 2015 plan. In our community engagement, there was a very coordinated effort to push for a splash pad at Belfour Park. We neither have the budget nor the room at Belfour to do a splash pad. Also, there was some concerns over whether a park of this size should have a splash pad, where we can't provide really good parking. And so we thought that the water play table would be a nice substitute going back to that neighborhood association plan. In our previous versions of this plan and the draft versions, we were showing a community garden in the lower left-hand corner. That's the southwest corner of the park, excuse me. We heard from our arborist, both our consulting arborist and city staff, that putting a community garden there would harm that red oak tree because it's extremely sensitive to compression. And that community garden would have to be within the critical root zone of that tree. Based on the community engagement that we received and the city's tree code for public property, those two things were in conflict with each other. We knew it was a big deal, so we contacted community members right away. We went back to the neighborhood association in November and came to city council for guidance in November. We actually did that twice early on in November and asked council, which should we do? Should we protect the trees or should we move forward with the community garden in a way that might harm that tree? Council's direction was to value the tree. We looked at this several different ways and ended up coming up with that a community garden just isn't going to fit with these other amenities that you see in the park. But by and large, the rest of the plan is the same. You have the embankment slide up in the northeast corner, a play area up at the top of the hill there as well. That playground is also conceptual, and we'll work with those same community groups to design the playgrounds this spring and this summer. We hope to be able to get the funding to enhance that safety surface as well. Our community has been very clear, as has our Parks and Rec Board, that they want us to provide in these three parks play options for everybody. So that's a mix of inclusive play, accessible features, sensory-based play, and nature-based play. And so we're trying to do that throughout the park by having these nature-based play features, as well as having play equipment that mimics natural features as well. It's a really big challenge that a lot of jurisdictions and park districts are wrestling with right now, how to make nature-based play accessible and how to make these parks available for everybody. And that is why, one of the reasons why we're applying for some additional funding right now, so that we can meet those expectations inside of the community. And if anybody watching or any of you all have any questions about those concepts that I just mentioned, part of our public engagement process was also included some public education around playground design. So on the city's YouTube channel, you'll see a playground design presentation where we go through all of those topics and talk about safety surfacing, as well as just regular playground design, safety features, and how we can design these parks to be utilized by everyone. So that's how we revised the plans for Bowman Bray and Belfour. Now you might notice that we were calling these concept plans. That is intentional for a couple of reasons. One is we're not following the same process as we did in the past, where plans would be added to the comprehensive plan. And so we want to distinguish between that. Also for our equity goals, a lot of people are sensitive to the term master plan. And so we're trying to get away from that. Also, this really describes, calling these concept plans really explains to the community where we are at in the development process, right? We are at the concept level stage right now, where we've gotten feedback from landscape architects and engineers. We're going to go through design, which we're doing right now to get the construction schematics. That is a higher level of detail and cost estimating, and then we'll have construction specs and do construction this next winter. But that's why we're calling these concept plans now. For Scott Park, we were really kind of starting from scratch. The old 1990 plan for Scott Park was barely implemented. You just had the really perimeter path around that, and then the amphitheater on the library parcel. So Scott Park is actually 2 parcels. That northern side there is zoned as open space. That is a property that was donated by the Denny family and named after their ancestors, the Scotts. And then the property closer to the library, that was donated by the Letting family. That is a downtown mixed use zoned property. Both of them allow parks outright, and we'll talk more about that in a second. But getting back to the plan, what we did in this process is we worked early on with multiple concepts, and through our planning process, we brought the plans together, overlapping them to this final concept here, which is a mix of the different amenities that we were showing through those multiple concept plans. So Scott Park will include an inclusive playground at the direction of council based on the community feedback that we had there. That's right there in the front of the building, or I'm sorry, right in front of the parking lot there. The perimeter path around the park will be replaced. That will be made out of permeable concrete by code. All of our concrete will be permeable by code. Up in the corner near the pond, we know that people really enjoy viewing that pond. So we have a pond platform there with some benches coming around the pond to make and redo the amphitheater stage and make that accessible. And then the path continues around to back up to the top of the playground area there. For able-bodied people, adventurous people who want to take a little bit of a shortcut, number 8 there is these rock hoppers. So that gives people kind of a different route to go up to mimic some nature-based play up to the top of the playground there. We also have nature-based play in the corner there. So that brown path is a soft surface play area. And we have some play logs there. On the other side of the path, number 10 is a picnic table. One thing I do want to mention is you see number 6, the outside area of those paths, that's that dark green area. That is going to be more of a meadow mix of shrubs and grass. That will be a lower maintained area. For all 3 parks, at every step of the community engagement, native plants were like the most sought after amenity in these parks. So that dark green area is going to be native plants, whereas number 7 there at the center of the park underneath the tree canopy, that's going to be your more high maintained turf grass area. And number 5, sort of the mix in between the 2, that different color green, that's going to be a riparian area. So that will actually expand the existing riparian area along the pond there. All we're going to do there is remove invasive species. In fact, we do have some dead trees there, and we'll probably leave those for habitat where we can. We are taking great care in this project to follow our tree code, and then, really spending a lot of time and thought at Scott Park because we do have natural resources on site. So there's both a water quality area and a vegetated site. Our project lead from our lead consulting company, Greenworks, is actually a wetlands scientist herself. And we have heard back from the Department of State Lands and the Department of State Fish and Wildlife Services on this project. We are staying outside of the pond, so we don't need to worry about any sort of wetland mitigation here. We will implement those comments from them where we can inside of the project area. Now, there is a lot of existing items near the library here. So number 7 is the nice flat turf grass area outside of the letting library. That is going to remain unchanged. We show that on this plan to communicate that to the public. The large rain garden to the north of that, number 6 there, that is the rain garden that will remain untouched. To the right on the plan there, to the east, that cement plaza and the Veterans Memorial, including the magnolia trees behind it, will remain unchanged, and the seating and steps down to the stage for the amphitheater will remain unchanged. We'll clean it up, but it's only the amphitheater and the access from the park into the amphitheater that we are going to be changing on that property. As I mentioned, the community is really interested in those ponds and really likes getting down and seeing the ducks and the geese. However, we are not able to deal with that causeway that is beyond the amphitheater. That would require wetland permitting, which would really drag out the process. It also probably would take up more money than we have for the entire park just to make that space safe and accessible for people. So right now we are calling to put that behind a fence and a gate, and hopefully we'll be able to deal with that in future phases or sometime in the future. And what'd I do? Okay, so upcoming next steps. So we'll have a type 3 review for all 3 of these parks. We expect that to be in May. Bowman Brae and Belfour are zoned residential, so we'll be going through the community service use process for the approval of those plans. And then Scott Park, we can build a park there by right based on zoning. However, because of the natural resources on site, we'll do a type 3 review for Scott Park. For all 3 parks, we are on schedule to meet our deadlines. So playground design will happen in the spring and the summer. We'll have our final design and our permitting wrapped up by the end of this fall. Construction will begin with mobilization in January of next year. And we hope to be a few weeks into construction around this time next year. And we will cut the ribbons with some celebrations in the community similar to our open houses in October of 2024.
I'm sorry, how do we get construction early winter of 2024 and a ribbon cutting in 2024?
So this is named by quarters. So winter 2024 is October, or I'm sorry, not October, January, February, and March.
Oh, thank you.
And so, yeah.
Thank you.
I think maybe, is there anything else, Adam, or open it up for questions from the commission?
I'm open for any questions that you guys might have on the concept plans or our community engagement process.
Maybe I'll start with our digital commissioners. Any questions on the concept plans or the public engagement process?
Hi, Chair. Just a question on the Scott Park concept plan. You mentioned that about putting up a fence over where you kind of can walk down by the amphitheater. Is there a fence now? I'm having a hard time kind of visualizing where that would be.
So that is, if my mouse will work with me, that is this area here. Right now, there is not a fence there. It is sort of the steep asphalt slope that's been kind of bumpy, and it leads down to a causeway between the two ponds. There is a fence on that causeway on the south side, but there is no fence between people on that sort of broken asphalt causeway and the pond there to the north. And so we're going to put a fence there before people can go down that hill. And that is just because of the permitting process and the cost of dealing with that causeway area. Does that answer your question, Commissioner Freeman?
Kind of. I was curious, like, if there's no fence there now, why do you need to put a fence there? The reason why I asked, I like walking down there myself. I was actually down there last weekend, and I think it's nice to kind of just take in the nature.
Yeah, it is a really nice feature, but it is not accessible. It's broken, and it is really unsafe for children. And we felt it was important to close that off rather than spend all of our money and all of our time just on that one simple feature. And we can provide, views of the pond through that pond platform number 2 in the concept plan, we hope.
Maybe just following up on Commissioner Freeman or Vice Chair Freeman's question. So it also sounds like, aside from safety concerns, that fencing it helps delineate it as not being part of the project from a permitting perspective and wetland regulations and those kinds of things.
Yes.
Is that what I'm hearing? Okay.
Can I just follow up? Was there any because those are bacon ducks down there. When you walk down there, the ducks come swimming up to you, looking for some bread and stuff, bacon ducks. Was there any concept about not being able to feed the ducks anymore, or having a duck feeding station or something like that?
So there is currently a sign there that asks people not to feed the waterfowl.
I don't have bread on me generally, so.
And we are going to maintain that. It is not good for us to feed those animals. That will maintain there. And the comments that we received from Fish and Wildlife at the state level asked us to put up signage for that. We already have it. We'll maintain it.
We can't get a nice viewing platform sponsored by Dave Killer Bread to keep taking care of the begging ducks.
Just to give you an idea of creating an accessible viewing platform down over that area, permits aside, that's probably a $800,000 project.
Wow. And permits another 50% of that or more?
Well, the real concern with the permitting is the level of investigation that we would need to do and the amount of time that those permits would take. Our ARPA money has extremely tight deadlines, and the state gave us additional deadlines to meet on that ARPA funding on top of the federal ones. So there was no way that this project would have gotten done if we had to get a wetland permit.
In other words, they're hoping that 1900 stone little ripple there just falls down on its own by gravity.
Future phase of the work. Vice Chair Freeman or Commissioner Edge, any other questions?
Just one other kind of quick question. So as far as the next steps in the process, so it sounds like the global designs for the parks are kind of mostly locked in, but so for the community engagement, those are just going to be for some of the features for the playgrounds. Is that the idea?
Yeah, and we are still continuing to do city council updates. So I will be before city council giving them an update on this project in June. Our monthly updates to the Parks and Rec Board are still continuing. Those are a little less formal now. PARB has decided not to record those, but we still do those every month at 5:30 at our regularly scheduled PARB meetings. We do have in our schedule and in our budget, should we get to the situation this past summer or this coming summer where anything has to be value engineered or changed a great deal, we will do additional engagement, including sending out some additional postcards. But we're keeping council and the Parks and Rec Board and our neighborhood associations engaged on this as we move forward. But to answer your question, in terms of the design, that design process is going on now. We're probably at about 15% design. The next round of really community-based design is going to be on those playground features. Our goal is to work with a couple community organizations. We haven't got everything locked in, but we're looking at an organization that works with kids who go to school in the Milwaukie area, an organization that works with families with children with disabilities, and then our Parks and Rec Board. And we would also invite our Equity Steering Committee members and members from our focus groups to that playground design charrette as well.
Just kind of on the comment about, getting further along in the design process and potentially needing to value engineer specific items. How does that work with us kind of approving concepts and not having a finalized design and say at some point, recognizing that costs of permeable asphalt have increased substantially and now we need to change that? Something like that would probably require coming back to Planning Commission for a variance.
Well, so if we were doing anything that changed the code, yes, we would come back for a variance. We don't anticipate asking for any variances right now. To answer your question about value engineering, we were extremely conservative in our cost estimating on this project. So everything that we showed the public in November and December were things that we thought we had a very strong path forward to pay for. When I'm talking about applying for grants, that's to go, that's to increase our budget and to do enhanced playground features to kind of meet those expectations of the community. But we do believe that we have a path forward to pay for everything right now. A lot of the volatility that we were seeing in the labor market and the supply market has started to even out. But on top of our regular 30% contingency for conceptual planning, we added in 12% for inflation. And then we are going out after additional funds. But yes, if we have to make some changes, as we get additional information, we'll do cost estimating in March before we bring the 30% designs to all of you. We'll do cost estimating in July, but we're really not going to know how much these parks cost until the bids come back. And that's why right now we're trying to be as proactive as possible by going out and getting as much funding as we can, but then also managing the expectations with the community in the conceptual planning last year. Some of our previous concepts showed a lot more picnic tables and benches and trees. We know the community wants to see those. Our hope is that we're going to get those bids back in the fall of next year, and we're going to be able to come back to the community and say, hey, we're going to be able to put a few more features in here. There's no guarantee on that right now, so we're just being really, really cautious on that.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Set a lower expectation and then over deliver.
It was a big concern of the consultants that we hired to help us with an equitable-based community engagement process. And we also heard that from the members that we worked with on creating our public involvement plan, that we should not be showing people things that we didn't think we can afford. And in the event that we had to do any sort of value engineering and remove features, that we would do additional engagement. We were really, really careful in our planning process. This town is seeing a lot of pretty pictures of parks that don't get built or don't get built the same way that they were shown, and we are not going to do that on this.
Any other questions or comments from planning commissioners?
I just have one. I want to commend you on the Scott Park and Balfour for meeting the 40% tree canopy. But yet at the same time, when I look at Bowman Bray, it seems that that tree canopy is not there. Could you explain the logic behind that, or was that not important for this park?
So the open lawn that you see there, that large open lawn, that was very important to the community in the 2015 plan. That continued to be very important to the community when we did our engagement here. Right now, as I just mentioned, we've been very careful about our budget and our estimating. We know that the community wants to see more trees there. Council would love us to put more trees there. But right now we're showing what we think we can afford there. I do not know if we're going to be able to get up to that 40% tree cover at Bowman Bray. without some additional funding or, construction bids coming back better. But that lawn that you're seeing there was really important to the community. Should we add in more trees, it would be in that dark green area outside of the perimeter path. That's again going to be that meadow and shrub mix. It's also going to provide some screening to the property. The east side of the park, which is the bottom of the page there, that's a private driveway. There's a house right there. So we'll provide some screenage there.
Folks have been doing plant sales for Balfour Park. Maybe Commissioner Hemer, you can set up a bake sale for some more trees that.
No, just the leftover trees they just take over there and they just plant them in there without telling anybody.
That's great. Any other questions?
Or you steal them from the tree farm.
Yeah, I've got a question, Chair.
Yeah, go ahead.
So first of all, I'm really happy with what I'm seeing here. I'm really glad that we're taking on this effort and we found funding to, build out these concept plans and for the remaining parks. So I'm really happy to see this moving forward and want to commend you on the work you've done on this to get us this far. In terms of, I guess this is kind of a public outreach piece. I just wanted to not ask, really more maybe suggest that, if it hasn't happened already, I'd like to see the Johnson Creek Watershed Council have the opportunity to provide feedback on the Scott Park plan. Now I realize it's substantially, complete, but at the same time, I know that you also have an expert on staff, but just giving the Watershed Council the opportunity to weigh in, I think would be a good idea.
Yeah, we can formally share that with them, and we're engaging with the Watershed Council on another project that they're working on near Milwaukie Bay Park right now. We have a lot of their active members. So Gary Klein is active in that organization. He's on our Parks and Rec board, and he came to nearly all of our planning meetings. I think he missed one. He was really upset about that. But yeah, we can reach out to them and make sure they have an opportunity to provide some formal comment on this.
Anything else from the Planning Commission?
Chair, I would just wanted to say that I appreciate the staff's work also on this. I had sat through a couple of the open houses and also participated in one or two of the focus groups, and really appreciate that the staff's work for reaching out to the community. And hopefully we keep that going as the process goes forward.
I was curious if you're tracking kind of lifespan and anticipated maintenance for these parks as well, what that would look like for future funding planning?
Yeah, so, long-term maintenance, long-term durability is a big consideration on this. That is one reason why we are going out after additional funding for those playgrounds, is to make sure that we can spend the money that we need on that equipment to get things that are going to last a very long time. We have been consulting with NCPRD staff. Right now, the city is still in NCPRD, and so they would be doing the maintenance on these parks. Should the city form its own parks department or change its park provider, we would be providing the maintenance there. But we do take that into consideration. It's, sort of the feasibility of planning in parks and open spaces is, economic feasibility, safety, and durability. So we are looking at sustainability in these amenities that we're going to be building, not only from like a climate change or an environmental perspective, but also what are we going to leave behind for future generations and taxpayers in the future.
Great. Well, maybe I just close by, I know others have said it, but thanking Senator Taylor and former Representative Power for helping get the funding to make this happen in the first place. And I want to thank you for your work and leadership on this. I think, as others have said on the commission, I really admire the public engagement, the thorough public engagement that's been done. And I know you've been kind of really providing significant leadership here. So thanks so much for your work on this. I think it's going to benefit the community for decades to come.
I also want to thank, and this is part of the CIAC as well, is those NDAs, and especially Lake and Ardenwald, because it has been their vision. I mean, 2015, look, 2015 seems like yesterday to me, but to a lot of people, it's 10 years ago. And so their hard work and their dedication, and poor Lake Road doesn't really have a park, and this is kind of their big, except for Century Park, which is our very first park, kind of their big thing. And I know that Ardenwald's been working on Balfour forever as well. So congratulations to them too. It just shows that the hard work and dedication that you put into your neighborhood can finally become proof positive if you work hard enough at it and hire great people like Mr. Moore here to make your vision become true.
Well, I think you really emphasized what I was going to say is, I appreciate all of the kudos. However, we can put together a planning process, but it takes people showing up and caring and giving us their feedback to make this happen. And so, without that participation from the community, you wouldn't be saying all of those things. So, a lot of people spent a lot of time on these plans. We had a very short engagement process where things were happening back to back to back, where we were doing multiple meetings in multiple stages for multiple parks at a time. We had a very, very busy spring, summer, and fall last year doing this project, and the community showed up every single time. So, those are the people that you should be thanking, not me. I get paid to do this. It's fun.
That's very true. Very true. Well, thanks so much for the briefing tonight. We look forward to seeing this in the next month or two. If there's nothing else, we can move on to our next order of business.
Thank you so much.
Thank
and
you.
if anybody in the community has any questions, feel free to reach out.
Great.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam.
Thanks, Adam. So we'll move to our second work session item, which was numbered as our first work session item, 7.1. This is our variance code update, which is a discussion about code amendments related to variances within multiple sections of the code. And it'll be introduced by Vera.
Yeah.
And we have fun doing the variance update.
It's as
We just
fun
want
as
you to
park
have a good
planning.
time,
Yeah.
okay?
It's just like park planning, I promise.
All the community is showing up to engage thoroughly in.
Okay, so evening, everyone. Thanks very much. Feels like all I do is talk about code amendments when I come here, but when there aren't projects, we'll just do code until something happens, right? Okay. All right, so I'm calling these housekeeping plus code amendments because they're more than just clarifications. We did a few things in putting together this package of code amendments. I know I was here a couple of weeks ago for sort of the little tweaks, the clarifications, the minor fixes. This is a different package of amendments that started with, we did a first pass, we did a review of all of the type 3 variance applications that came before the Planning Commission over the last 5 years, just to kind of get a handle on, do these need to be type 3 variances? Are these sort of worth all the effort and time from the Planning Commission? Is there something else that we could be doing within the code to handle some of these requests? We looked at pre-application conferences that we've been holding over the last several years to see what are people proposing, what are the development applications that we're seeing, and what are the kinds of things that our code may not be able to accommodate for these projects, just to kind of get a sense, sort of ground truth the code a little bit, particularly with the middle housing code amendments, because now we're seeing what that actually means in real life when projects come up. So some of these changes are more substantive than housekeeping. Some of them are clarifications. To be fair, since we had this sort of an open package of code amendments, we started dropping things in as things were coming in. So it's a bit of a kitchen sink package of code amendments, but it really did start with our review of type 3 variances and trying to see if there's a way that we can streamline some of our processes. Happy to answer any questions as we go, so please feel free to interrupt. Pretty standard process. Work session with you folks. We'll do a work session with the city council once we kind of get through our process with the planning commission. We'll do a code commentary with 30-day notice. We'll public hearings, and we'll of course provide notification to the NDAs with this. But I'm happy to hear any feedback as we go through these, if there's additional things that we ought to be doing or who we should be talking to. So with the staff report, there were some sort of summaries of what the amendments are that we're proposing, as well as the draft of the underlying strikeout amendments as well. There are quite a few changes that we're proposing to the Title 12 access management section. We've held quite a number of type 3 variance applications to the Title 12 access management section. That's the city engineer's sort of realm. And so we try to do a couple of different things. We wanted to take a look and see if there's a way that maybe we don't need a type 3 variance to some of these access standards. Is there a way that we can open up the modification section of the code, which already exists for some aspects of the access management section, and be able to provide that modification authority to the city engineer for other access management standards. When we look at what those standards are and those requirements, a type 3 variance doesn't seem like the right process to be able to modify engineering safety standards. The variance is very specific to impacts. It's a very discretionary decision, and it doesn't seem to be tied as much to math and safety standards as that modification process is. Again, the modification process already exists within the code. We wanted to add some of the other access management standards into that modification process. The proposed code includes, with the help of the city engineer, of course, and the engineering tech 3, talk about what that access study would be, what it would require, what is the information that the city engineer would need in order to be able to modify those standards. We don't think that variance process is a good avenue for resolving those safety issues. And since the city engineer already has that authority, it seemed like a reasonable expansion of that authority to cover that entire subsection and not just part of it. It also wasn't really clear the way that whole section is written, which ones need a variance and which one can be a modification. It's not a greatly written section of code, so we tried to clarify some of that language as well. So I'm happy to answer any questions. We also did within that section talk about what the appeal process might be if an applicant, because that is not clear in there either. So we borrowed language, or we borrowed the process from the ADA standards process that we already have, and we mimicked that appeal process, giving that authority to the community development director, who already has that authority now for the ADA appeals process as well. So I'm happy to answer any questions, or I can keep going.
I just had one quick clarifying question there. I know that, under the, for instance, the location limitations, that, arterial and collective streets aren't supposed to have, direct access to, single detached residential lots. But what if, through the transportation system plan update process that we are about to go through, if we identify a segment of street as, say, we should not have any curb cuts at all, would this allow the city engineer to override that policy and allow an access on a segment of street where policy intends for such access not to occur?
That's a good question because the code does, and I'm going to pretend to be a junior engineer here a bit, I think. But there is a code provision that requires us to, there are some sections that we can't deny access to an existing parcel. It's when we're creating new properties through the partition process. That's where the authority of the city engineer comes in, and that's when we're trying to find alternative ways, requiring shared access points on an existing curb cut, which we've already done on a couple of partitions on King Road already. So that already exists where the city engineer is already requiring combining access points. But I see what you're saying, that if the TSP is starting to identify other things from policy, how do we reflect that in the code? And I would imagine that the TSP will likely result in some code, it may result in some code amendments anyway. So we may need to do that. But that's a good question, and maybe that's something that we ought to be thinking about now.
And then the appeal process, is that really simply for applicants to appeal something that they don't like, or is there the ability for an NDA or a member of the public to appeal?
Well, so the issue with that, and it's a good question, it was generally the thought of as this was the way for an applicant to appeal the city engineer's decision on a modification. I think if a neighbor or an abutter or someone had an issue with the city engineer's decision, it would likely be through a land use process already. But if what you're asking is how would, if it was just a standalone modification without a land use review that was coming here, for example, or even a type 2 process, how would a member of the public even know that modification was issued? Is that, I guess I just want to understand, is that a concern? Because that I will need to go back and kind of think about how does the public find out about a modification, because it's not a land use application. There isn't, a notification process for that. It's an engineering determination.
I get that according to, state law, that it's not really a land use decision. And so we aren't obligated to provide the regular land use processes for public input and all of that. But transportation system decisions like this, even on an individual lot by lot basis, can have, impacts, land use impacts. And so while it might not be the letter of the law that we require that, it might be more the spirit of the law, and it might be a good idea for us to think about how we might accommodate that.
Okay.
That isn't something we currently do now.
No,
correct.
no.
But we currently do because we make it a type 3 process.
Only some access spacing standards are variances, some are modifications. So that's part of the issue with this section. Some of them are already modifications, but other ones are type 3 variances, and those are some of the ones that we've seen here before the commission. Let us think about that and see kind of how we might address, noticing or how folks can find out about a modification. I don't have a good answer right now, but we can certainly think about that.
Would adjacent property owners be notified at any point of a requested modification?
No, they aren't now.
It would depend, right, it would depend on, so for example, if it was a type 2 partition, like the one on King Road, I'm just making that up, but there would be a review process for that. But the applicant, through that process could be asking for a modification from the city engineer, the way this is written. And that modification would be reflected within the, within the application, within the findings. But, so that would be something that a neighbor would be reading in the findings after the notice of decision is issued, because they have the opportunity to comment on the application, but that modification may not be kind of part of their, would likely not be part of that application process or what they would see as part of the notice. I'll have to think about that.
Yeah.
But it is a good question. So, okay.
All right.
Okay.
I don't know how often, just scanning the chapter and the proposed changes, but just want to note our 12.16.070, that penalty is but a slap on the wrist. So, yeah. Single $250 penalty doesn't strike fear in the heart of many.
We could look at that. And while we're already there.
Yep. Yep.
Not that we probably have never issued a violation,
I
at
don't
least in
think so.
recent history, but got to keep it in
Okay.
check.
Yeah.
Requires code enforcement.
All right. Okay. Moving on, we've proposed a definition for plex development because it's used in the code to distinguish duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes from cottage clusters and townhouses. When middle housing is sort of what we've been talking about for everything, but plexes do behave differently than cottages, cottage clusters, and townhouses in some sections. So we wanted to be able to use plex development in a couple sections of the code and have a definition for it. So that's what that is for. Yeah, some of the standards are different, units on individual lots, for example. So we wanted to make sure that we had, I was saying plex development out loud and it wasn't in the code anywhere. So I figured we probably should put that in the code as well. Doesn't happen very often, but it's a helpful way of distinguishing the housing types.
I'll retract my comment on the slap on the wrist fine because it can also be issued for every day of the violation.
Yes.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
We can still look at it to make sure
It's fine.
Okay. We are proposing some amendments to 301 and 302, so the moderate density and the high density residential zones specific to the minimum lot size for a townhouse on a corner lot. So it's a very niche kind of amendment, but because we have a minimum street side yard setback that is much larger than a side yard setback, so it's 15 feet, we've run into issues specifically with the minimum lot size. When you have a townhouse development on a corner lot, and we have a lot of underlying lot lines for a lot of these old subdivisions, but that street side yard setback, in order to accommodate that and still be able to build a unit on that corner lot, that lot will, by definition, be larger than 2,999 square feet most of the time. Because the way our code is written, we have a minimum lot size of 1,500 to 2,999 square feet for a townhouse lot. But on corner lots, that's a problem. And so it's affected, and we've seen this come up on several occasions now through pre-app conferences or just folks that happen to have a corner lot with underlying lots, and they're trying to accommodate that street side yard setback. This sketch is from one of those proposals, and the townhouses, if they're using sort of a standard size of a townhouse, you can see that one of those lots, the one close that's facing 52nd, that's the street side yard setback with the 15-foot setback plus the width of the townhouse. That lot ends up being 3,400 square feet, but the townhouse itself isn't any bigger. It's because of that street side yard setback. So what we talked about it quite a bit on the staff, back of house staff, kind of how do we deal with this? And what we thought would make sense is a very specific code accommodation for a townhouse lot that's on a corner, that lot can exceed that 2,999 square foot. So that, and most of those lots are generally end up in that 35 by 100, kind of size because of that street side yard setback. So wondering what folks think about that.
Yeah, and just to make sure I'm tracking, are you saying the accommodation is on what the street side yard setback would be? So we'd be reducing that?
No,
Or it would
we would be increasing the
about
lot
increasing-
size.
Gotcha.
Correct,
Yeah.
yeah.
I don't know if I have any issues with that. where I was kind of spending my time thinking as you were talking was just maybe about corner lots generally, not just with townhouses. I mean, I remember we had two fairly standard innocuous type 3s before us like this fall. Like I'm trying to remember, both of them were corner lots, single unit dwellings. One of them was like trying to replace their carport, but because of lot lines and those kinds of things, they had to come before the planning commission. So I don't know if there's even just a broader rethinking of corner lots that should be done. I know you're focused here specifically on the townhouse issue, but it seems like that we've ran into some issues in the zoning code as it pertains to those corner lots. We might want to think about it more broadly.
Yeah, I think corner lots have come up as challenges, particularly with existing development, when the existing development doesn't meet the current street side yard setback. So the corner lot doesn't help them. And we've tried to be reasonable about, well, is this the street side yard setback or is it the front yard setback? And trying to be able to work with folks, because we have a lot of existing development that just doesn't meet our current standards, and the corner lot doesn't always help them in that particular case. So you're right, corner lots probably, maybe that is a bigger look at that we need. I think we're targeting townhouses because they're specifically prohibited from being on a lot larger than 2999 square feet. So it's kind of set up like that. So this was the way we thought we would do that. And we would be attacking it from a minimum lot size standpoint, as opposed to, we would still be maintaining the street side yard setback. That was the way we thought we would look at it. But you're not wrong that corner lots have been challenging for folks.
Yeah, and Chair Sherman, we can look at that at some point. Like we have a big list of code fixes, right? And so what we spent a lot of time this year was going through and kind of doing them in tiers of understanding what are the little fixes, what are these medium-sized fixes, and then what are the larger things that we need to work on, right? And this list is never going to go away. Yeah. It's going to just continue to build. And so we can think, we can maybe take a quick look at the corner lots and see if it's something that we could get into at this point in time, or if we should put it on that list and be like, okay, we're going to get to that when we get back to the list.
No, I think I understand staff capacity constraints. I think it makes a ton of sense. I'm just kind of thinking back and, I don't know what the application cost of a type 3 variance is, but I was remember thinking about those two specific property owners, like these people are here for a type 3 for a carport,
one
charging them more for a permit than they probably are going to pay for the contract.
One was an existing condition that they got code enforcement called upon them.
Yeah.
And they went to a variance just to allow what was already existing on there.
What we could do is we could definitely go back, because that's one of the things that we've been doing.
Yeah.
We went back and we're like looking at the variances, like what things have gone through variances and what things made sense for it to go through a variance and what things didn't really make a lot of sense in these instances that you're talking about. Yeah. So we could go back and take another pass and see if that's something that we can bring back to you, because that is how we have been analyzing the variance.
Create the list.
Yes, that's how we create the list.
Vice Chair Freeman, Commissioner Edge, any digital comments or questions?
I do have a question. Thank you, Chair. So I'm really struggling with this one. What are the policy justifications for requiring that setback on the side that you don't require for other lots?
If the question is, why do we have a street side yard setback? I just want to make sure I'm hearing the question correctly.
Yeah. What are the policy justifications for the street side yard setback?
Right. The way I've understood our policy behind the street side yard setback is that on a corner lot, it's being treated as if it's another front yard. And so it's maintaining a relationship with the street similar to the way a front yard has a relationship with the street. It's basically, it's either almost the same or slightly smaller. In this case, in some of the lots, it's 15 feet, so it's slightly smaller. But our building design standards treat street side yards as if it were the front yard from a design standard standpoint for structures as well. So windows and all of that sort of thing all need to be, you need to have more windows on a street side yard than you do on a regular side yard setback. So it's intended to function because it's presenting a face towards the street. And so there's a larger yard because of that, like a front yard. So I don't know that I can point to the specific policy, like from the comprehensive plan. I can go back and certainly try to find that, but it's like I said, it's like a front yard. And that's why corner lots are treated that way.
And that's existed for a long time.
Long time.
Long time.
We've always had a
Yes,
street side yard
always.
setback. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand. I guess it's consistent with the policy that, buildings need to complement the public realm. So that makes sense. I'm just, I struggle with requiring such a large lot at a minimum for a townhouse.
Yeah, and Commissioner Edge, while maybe it's consistent with that specific comprehensive plan policy, maybe it's not consistent with housing affordability policies, where here we are allocating, a bunch of requiring an allocation of space for essentially a second front yard.
Right.
Interesting point.
Yeah. Well, and I think, and just as a larger question, because we have so many underlying lots, that can, just sort of be reestablished. If any of them are on a corner, it's an unbuildable lot. Like you can't put a townhouse on it because that street side yard setback. So you'll see all these 25 by 100 lots, on all of these lots. But if it's on a corner, you can create the lot, but you can't build a townhouse on it because you can't, or they're coming in for a variance to the street side yard setback. That's the alternative, is that we don't make this change and folks are coming in for a variance.
And can you remind us, what are our existing kind of minimum side yard setbacks?
5 feet.
5 feet.
Yeah. I mean, certainly for townhouses, they're connected. Yeah.
So but the side yard setback, the 15-foot side yard setback for street-facing side yard, that applies to anything, right?
Correct. Yes.
And that's why we can do that to middle housing. Okay.
Yeah.
That applies to anything in residential zone.
Correct.
Not commercial?
Not commercial, but also, does that apply to higher density?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
There's a street side yard, yes.
Up 15 feet? Yeah.
It's either 15 or 20. I think it depends on the size. I'll have to go back to the code. It's either 15 or 20. It's never smaller. It's 15 or 20, depending on the lot size, I believe.
And mixed use properties wouldn't fall into this category?
No, mixed use, those are in our GMU, DMU, those, yeah, there's different standards for those. Yes, yeah.
This is maybe a really esoteric question / statement, but how does this fall into play when an applicant is going into a partition application used to break up, to establish those underlying lots when everything has to be shifted over?
Right, so under normal situation, they could just go to the county to reestablish the lots. Then it becomes an issue when they try to submit a building permit for that lot, right? Because they can't meet that. So then in the partition, then it's either a subdivision or a partition application, depending on how many lots they're creating. So yeah, if they're shifting everything, then it ends up being, generally it'll be a subdivision application here, and they'd be coming here for that as a type 3. Yeah.
Okay.
Unless it's an expedited middle housing land division, and then it's a type 2. Yeah.
But they still would have to comply with the 15-foot side yard setback even for an expedited middle housing land division, right?
Yes, because that's the perimeter. Yes.
Yeah, right, okay.
Yep.
I'm wondering if I'm hearing if there might be appetite on the Planning Commission to potentially reduce that minimum street side yard setback.
Unequivocal, yes.
I do want to caution, there are reasons for the 15-yard setback more than just visual or pedestrian. I'm getting to, there's engineering requirements as well for corner lots where there's an established site triangle. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes.
Sight lines.
distance, yep.
For traffic safety. And also, I don't know if they're established across the city, but also public utility easements, making sure that there's enough space for, major utility lines and stuff. So across the board, canceling it, I would caution taking a step that eliminates that or gets us into conflict with our engineers, but maybe bringing it to our staff to discuss it with our engineers to see if that's a viable option. But that's my opinion.
Well, and I would probably want to have consensus that was the direction that we're going, just because I think that that's a well-established setback that probably was put in when it was more single unit development and the idea was to have space between your neighbors, and the emphasis wasn't so much as on creating like larger densities and getting in more housing, but it was kind of to have space in between the houses. It was really kind of based on the way the neighborhood was built and not wanting to have density in neighborhoods. So I think it's just something, it's probably a larger conversation than this, because it's not just townhomes. It would apply to single family or single unit, duplexes, triplexes. So I think it's a valid conversation to be having. I'm not sure it's housekeeping plus.
Because we had this conversation before about, because as far as I'm concerned, on a corner lot, you treat it the same as your front door to your side, and right, the logic is that because you have a front yard setback that is required from everybody on the street that has their door facing there, and it is not, I don't know if fair is the right word, but it is incongruent to build something out to the street there. I think that we had this conversation, we moved forward Didn't we move forward the front yard setback from 20 feet to 15 feet?
We did not.
No.
Well, maybe we did, or at least we did it for flag lots or something, right, from 30 feet to 20 feet. But I think that is a reasonable conversation to have that conversation, which then can move your side yard at the same time too, or your site on your corner lots. I mean, the 20 feet is there really to provide for the driveway in all reality. And if we're banning parking from anybody, then why have that 20 feet there?
Well, to be clear, we're not banning parking for anybody.
The state's,
Not
I'm sorry.
required anymore.
The state has highly said that you don't have to put in parking anymore.
I'm gonna get the gavel out, Commissioner Hamer. Yeah, I think Laura, as you were just saying, it probably, like, the conversation we're starting probably does fall in beyond the threshold of cleanup plus.
I think so.
I think it is, though. I would maybe encourage staff to raise this on your upcoming briefing with council as something that Planning Commission is interested in digging in more with you all, and maybe they can then provide some direction on that. I think there's probably some legitimate questions and concerns that, as Commissioner Carpenter raised, but, thinking about what we're seeing here and, just, do we really need to kind of, require developers to dedicate so much space when that space could be used maybe towards different purposes? So maybe council can provide some direction on that, and we can figure out if it gets onto the work plan at some point.
Okay, yeah, we can do that.
Great.
Commissioner Edge, thanks for starting us on the conversation on this. I appreciate that.
See, code, it can be as fun as parks. It's a different kind of fun.
We don't have any beggar ducks, though, in cleanup.
They are totally beggar ducks. When you walk over there, they just come swimming right
I
up
had
to you.
so many beggar ducks as a kid at the rhododendron gardens. It was like my aunt's favorite thing to do with me and my siblings.
Okay, so the next amendment that we are proposing is, so you may be familiar with the GMU zone, the Monroe Apartments were subject to this. So the GMU zone is written very similarly to the downtown mixed-use zone when it comes to height. So we have height bonuses within the GMU. The difference is that when we were going through the whole moving forward Milwaukie process and the central Milwaukie plan, when the code for the GMU was written, it was decided that yes, there would be height bonuses, but if you're going to use them, you need a type 3 height variance. And so that's what got codified. And what we're asking, what staff is asking and proposing is that we don't think it's necessary to require a discretionary variance if the code includes the bonuses. So if the height bonuses are there and you have to meet the design standards and so on, why are we telling folks that they need to go through a type 3 height variance? They might as well, it seems incongruous to have a bonus and still require a very discretionary type 3 height variance. The language to us is misleading and it's confusing to have those two things. What we would propose is that if a developer is going to use the 2 height bonuses as allowed in the code, then that's what they can do. If they want to build their buildings to that height without using the bonuses, building it in some different way, or they want to exceed the height bonuses, then they would need the type 3 discretionary height variance. But it doesn't seem to be a bonus if you still need a type 3 variance to get the height.
We allow that in
anyway.
other sections of the code,
The
right?
DMU has the height
DMU.
bonuses without the height variance requirement. The height variance is required in the downtown if you exceed that. But you get the bonuses for free because they're bonuses. And so we wanted to at least open this door, but the Monroe Apartments, the 5-story building in the middle of that site, are building residential buildings and they are building a green building. So those are the 2 bonuses that they wanted to take advantage of, but then they still needed to get the type 3 height variance process.
Right, but see, the difference is, in my mind, is that those zones don't actually require any sort of commercial use as an offering. So your residential is a given. So you're just giving them an extra floor because it's a given, which seems a little ridiculous. So you use your Monroe, right? Because they're not required to actually put any commercial or retail space or anything down below, or it just couldn't just be office space or something like that. It had to be residential. So you're just giving them an extra floor just because the code requires them to build residential? That's ridiculous.
Wouldn't they be able to get the extra floor anyway? Because the code already allows them to do that. It's just that now they're asking to come in for a variance to do something that the code already.
Well, their height
I
limit.
couldn't understand it.
I want to make sure the height limit's three stories or
Yes.
45 feet or 50 feet or
5 feet.
whatever we call it.
Yep.
And then you get a bonus for residential, right? 25% of the building. This is the downtown, right?
But no, we're talking about GMU.
We're in,
I understand. I'm just trying to match this with the
Yeah.
DMU, right? 25% residential, you get a bonus height. Green building, you get a bonus height.
In downtown.
In downtown. Downtown also requires you to have commercial space on the lower floor.
not on every street. Downtown has different zones where you can't have first floor residential, but you can in other areas. North of Scott Street, you can have residential on the first floor.
Do you give them an automatic bonus height and that section for
Height bonuses apply to that section as well.
to the entire DMU zone, even though we have different qualifications in the DMU zone?
So just to be clear, what you're saying or suggesting, Commissioner Heemer, is that the comparison between the GMU height bonus and needing the type 3 and the DMU bonus, height bonuses, you're saying it's apples to oranges, not.
Right, because your GMU is basically a residential zone with a mixed use. The DMU is mainly, could be any sort of commercial application. You are just trying to encourage residential with that.
But the GMU zone is a mixed use zone. You can do a mixed use building just like you can in the downtown.
Right,
You can.
but it's
They
also
didn't.
not required that you do commercial down below though.
No.
Like in some
Correct.
points of the DMU is.
Correct, yes.
And so if the majority of those things are going to be residential, Why wouldn't you just allow 4-story buildings in that zone?
Well, that might.
Why
that
even
might
goof
not-
around with the bonus?
That might not be code cleanup plus.
Well, but that's what I'm saying. That's essentially what you're saying.
Well, I don't know if that's totally true.
Now, I'm fine with the green building. I'm fine with the green building, right? Giving them that bonus height for the green building, because I think that's a great incentive. But it just bothers me that literally your development that's going to be there is going to be 90% residential.
But it doesn't have to be. I think that's the thing staff's
no,
saying, right? It's
I hear you.
Monroe could have had commercial included in it.
Right.
They chose not to, and part of that choice, they hit the 25% threshold.
Right, but I think what you're not understanding what I'm saying is that in the downtown mixed-use zone, you're trying to encourage residential because there could be a variety of options there that you could build. In these other zones, you don't have those variety of options. You can have mixed use down below, but it can't be completely office,
Correct.
right? So you're going to end up with residential development anyways. So you're actually not really encouraging anything. You're just giving away a floor because you're going to say, oh, well, if you build a 25%.
Well, our code already does that.
Right. I think there's two schools of thought
We're
here,
already
though.
doing that. We're already giving those 2 floors away. We're just requiring them to ask for a variance, even though we're already allowing them to do
We're asking that in a different zone, not in the DMU zone, because we realize the value in the DMU zone. All I'm saying is that most of those buildings are going to be residential in the GMU zone.
I don't
Well,
know
that
if
just
that's
might be a
true.
function of land use to begin with. And Commissioner Edge, yeah, please join us.
So the I think there's two schools of thought here, and I think and I don't really disagree with Commissioner Hamer with what I think his point is, which I think is that what we want to do is give a floor bonus, give the height bonus when there's mixed uses, basically. If you're going to include a commercial component as well as residential, then you get a bonus. And that's that would be encouraging, mixed uses. And that way the apartments, behind Milwaukie Marketplace, they would have been able to, if they had a commercial on the ground floor, maybe they wouldn't have needed the variance, right? But I think that the other school of thought on this is that we want to encourage residential, period. And so, whereas if you want to come in and do an all commercial building, you get 45 feet. If you're going to come in and do residential, yeah, we'll just give you an extra floor over what you could do for a commercial building. I think that's what the code is trying to do. And I think that's probably more consistent with our comp plan policies that are so housing affordability heavy, that the goal is really to incentivize residential buildings and new residential uses in these zones, rather than to save the bonus only for mixed uses. Am I reading that right?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, and so I want to actually approve your logic. If you do commercial down below and you have 25% residential, I would have no problem giving that extra floor bonus.
Your point is, if you're doing 100% residential, why would you then get the extra bonus on top of that?
It just doesn't make any sense to me.
Okay.
Well, and I think maybe this is yet again a little bit different than what we had originally thought. It's not really housekeeping plus, it opens up a policy conversation
Right.
right. So I'm thinking that maybe the better time to change this, because this is getting into the policy conversation, is when we are getting ready to do the hubs work and we're getting ready to do the housing production strategy work, and we're looking at the different zones and thinking about whether the zones are doing what they need to be doing and making adjustments to those zones. That is when we should be having this conversation. So at least I think so, because we're going to be having a broader conversation about what all the zones are doing, right, and what we're trying to accomplish there.
Right.
And so maybe this, we don't actually move this forward now. We just table this to the side, and then we have a larger conversation when we get into all the other zones.
I like that, Laura. And for Commissioner Edge and Vice Chair Freeman, there's a lot of heads shaking here in the room. I'd be curious to hear from you both if you think that makes sense as well.
I would agree. Yeah, that makes sense to me.
I mean, I'd be fine with what staff is proposing, but I do think it's a larger question if we, I think it's a larger question that needs to be explored.
Great. Well, let's move forward, kind of table this one as part of those other conversations so we can keep moving forward with the presentation.
We made bets, like how far we would get with like, what does policy light mean, right? Housekeeping plus.
Yeah.
And we just, we were like, how far is it going to go? And see, they just get into bigger policy conversations because they're so juicy.
That's right. Great. Okay, let's talk about the NMIA. This code amendment kind of came directly from a variance that you all talked about on Moore Street. We are proposing to revise the applicability of the design standards in the NMIA and apply sort of basically a threshold that if you're within 50 feet of a front or a street side lot line, that's when the design standards apply. That threshold is not in the code right now. So if you recall the addition at 2107 Southeast Moore Street, it's that industrial building on Moores. It was clear at the back of the site, the addition, but they requested a variance from those design standards because it was an addition to an existing building. It would have required it to be in brick or a completely different construction material, but it was well over 100 feet away from the street and you couldn't even see it from the street. We have a similar standard for design standards that apply to residential development for single family through plex development and so on, that if you're within 50, that the design standards only apply if you're within 50 feet of the street. If you have a deep lot and it's way in the back, we're not going to require all the different design standards, because the whole idea is that relationship of the building to the street. That's the point of the design standard. So we wanted to propose that a similar threshold for the NMIA as well. So curious to know what you think about the applicability of the design standards for buildings that are beyond 50 feet of a street, the front or the street side lot line.
Any questions?
So is this about what's visible from the street, or is this about just simply the distance between the street and the structure that is in question?
That's a good question. It is specific to a measured distance. We want to apply a clear and objective standard. What is visible from the street depends on where you're standing, how tall you are, if there's something in the way. We had that conversation. I think we had a standard when Denny Egner was here as the planning director, and he would talk, well, I can see it. If I stand over here at this corner and look at this angle, I can see it. They should still have to use brick or whatever. And it started to, that's not clear and objective. So we're proposing this as a measured distance, Commissioner Edge, but welcome to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, if there was a clear and objective way to, because I think the intent is really what's visible from the street.
Yeah.
And if it was reasonable to expect that new development may occur in that 50 feet or more, that is then maybe kind of like how you do a party wall, and you don't care about, having the same standards because, you're anticipating that something else is going to go eventually. And so, but it sounds like that really the intent of this is to what's visible from the street. And so to honor that policy, I wonder if we could find something that's clear and objective that isn't just a simple 50-foot measurement. But I appreciate that is, super easy to, to clearly identify if someone, is complying with it or not. But yeah, that's just what I'm thinking, is just if there is a way to honor the policy a little bit more than just a straight measurement.
What would we be, could you give maybe some examples of like, what would we be losing by kind of adopting this? So that development is 51 feet back. Design standards don't apply anymore. What does that mean? What does that look like?
Well, so that can be a building that can be a metal, standing seam metal building with no windows. I'm thinking about what our design standards are. There's what building materials and transparency. Those are the two kind of key things. Main entrances, covered main entrances, that kind of thing. So for the most part, for predominantly what my guess is, it will be transparency. It'll be windows percentages and building materials will be the two, is my sort of guess as what we would lose. We would get a more standard kind of industrial looking building, I think.
And is it fair to say that we wouldn't be approving new construction of buildings 51 feet back from the kind of front lot line nowadays? So we're mainly just talking about maybe like non-conforming structures in some way?
Well, I mean, I think part of the hope for the NMIA was seeing some redevelopment if we were going to find it. That's really valuable property there, it turns out. So we're not seeing a lot of that. We don't have I think we have one for sure vacant lot. And there's one lot that is a larger lot they're actually building a second building kind of on their larger property. And it will be within 50 feet of the street because it's not that big of a lot. But it's mostly going to be additions, kind of redevelopment kinds of situations like that is, for the most part, is my guess. Yeah.
Would this affect any sort of landscaping requirements in the front?
No, there are landscaping requirements already. So those apply to the site itself, like percentages and that kind of thing. So that would still remain.
Great.
Yeah. Yep.
Other thoughts, questions? Well, maybe you've received some marginally helpful feedback.
No, we can certainly think about, no, this is why we come here for work sessions, to get other perspectives on this. So we can definitely come back and think about that a little bit more. Okay. Let's see. So we have a section for supplementary development regulations, section 500. We have a couple of things that we wanted to propose here for changes. One, so our code currently allows a front porch to encroach into the front yard setback by 6 feet. We are proposing that we would allow a back deck to do that as well, under the exact same circumstances though. So the way the encroachment for a front porch is that the front porch is no taller than 18 inches from grade. So it's really your basic front porch, like at grade front porch, and it's not enclosed. It can be covered, but it doesn't have walls. So what we are thinking about is allowing a back deck that meets those same, so it's the first floor back deck, not the second floor back deck, and it could still be covered, but we have come up against some folks that would really like to cover a back deck area, and that roof, that applies the rear yard setback, and they would need a variance for that. We've had a couple folks actually need that and not go through the type 3 variance process because it was a lot of expense and time to do that.
We saw a lot of it during COVID because people were trying to build out their
backyards. Exactly. Yeah. So we wanted to propose that we would allow that same back porch, front porch encroachment to give people a little more flexibility in being able to use their backyards. So
What's the existing backyard setback?
20 feet.
20 feet.
Yeah,
Right, so you're going to allow them to build a back deck 13 to 13 feet,
14 feet.
14 feet
Yeah,
with a covered porch.
correct. Yeah. That's the idea, that we would allow folks to do that.
I mean, currently, can't you build a deck all the way up to the gate? But it just can't be, all the way up to the back line as long as it's just 1 foot?
Yeah, but you can't cover it.
But you can't cover it, that right?
Correct.
The cover is the issue.
The cover is the issue. That's right. Yep. Yeah.
That one seems very reasonable to me.
Okay. Any other? Okay. The second piece of supplementary development regulations is a lot of folks are using their properties and wanting to do more things, and our accessory structure design standards don't allow metal siding for a structure that's over 200 square feet. So we have 3 types of accessory structures by size. Up to 200 square feet is a type A, up to 600 square feet is a type B, and then anything over that is a type C. If you're over 200 square feet, we require that you use residential type of siding, which means not metal siding, something else. We are seeing a lot of prefabricated sheds and outbuildings that folks are using for shops or something else. And they're coming in and, oh, but it's already metal sided, and we have to tell them, well, you're gonna have to put wood siding onto it. It makes for a very awkward conversation at the counter. And we understand that in a residential,
Don't
setting.
at thinking about permits and permit requirements
It's just-
from the start.
Well, they go to Home Depot, whatever, they're ordering a shed. That's what happens,
Home
right?
Depot doesn't say go down to the planning
They
desk.
don't.
Sure you can.
They don't.
Okay.
I'm surprised they even walk in the door.
So, and we understand, we're trying to have structures, this is a residential neighborhood, a big giant metal, prefab building is not what we're looking for, but up to the 600 square feet, the type B accessory structure, we wanted to propose that it could also be allowed to be metal sided to sort of acknowledge that there are a lot of prefabricated things. It's a 20 by 30, metal sided accessory.
And for the audience, we're talking about a 10-foot by 6-foot building. We're not talking about something that's
No,
immaculate.
600 square feet,
10
20
6
by
is
30.
60 square feet.
Yeah.
So we need to add.
30 by 20.
Yeah.
Yeah,
A 30 by 20 building.
correct, yeah.
Yeah.
Right now, a 10 by 20
Pretty
is
big.
the largest that you can have that can be metal sided. And so we wanted to propose that we'd go up to the next type of accessory structure and allow it to have metal siding.
So that a type B up to 600 feet would be allowed to have metal siding.
That's the request, that's the
And what
proposal. yeah.
are the setback requirements on that, on a type
Same.
B?
5 feet.
5 feet.
Yep,
I feel like that's where the rub might actually be.
Yeah.
Is more there than in terms of kind of the overall size. I'm just thinking about like if I were to put a 600 square foot shed in my backyard, 5 feet from my lot line, I know that was 15 feet tall. I know a number of my neighbors would have some questions and concerns about that.
yeah.
Maybe less on the metal siding and more on the height, just thinking about solar and their gardens and those kinds of things.
Yep.
So
So does that include if I wanted to put a railroad car back there?
It would. And we have a few of those.
No, I'm not saying
Those
that it's.
containers, no, we have shipping
I
containers.
was thinking about a caboose.
That's
that
what I was thinking
Commissioner
too. I was like,
Evers
is
like-
it
I knew exactly what you meant.
Yeah.
Are we gonna have a historic setup in the back?
It's all wood.
Commissioner Hemer's Historic Railroad Museum. Josh or Joseph, any thoughts on this you want to weigh in on?
Not really. So it's a 600 square foot. You said 20 by 30. So is this could it be used for like an ADU, for like a little tiny house, or
ADUs have their own design standards. So that, if you're building an ADU that's 600 square feet, those are separate design standards for the residents. This is for a shop or a big shed or that kind of accessory structure.
And the key differentiator being no sewer or kitchen?
No kitchen.
No kitchen.
No one's living in it. It's not a residential building. It's not built to be lived in or to have anybody sleeping in it. And there's building codes that are specific to that. So, yeah.
Josh, did you have anything else on that question?
No, I'm just thinking out loud. I don't have a specific objection to it.
You can really buy prefab buildings that are this big.
You really can.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you get a shipping
It's
container.
pretty big. I know you can do a shipping container, but this is really pretty big. But if it's a standard product that people are buying, I understand the desire to do this. I don't have any strong opinions about it.
And you need a big amount of space.
So, and just to refresh again. So a type A, that's the up to 200 square feet.
Correct.
You can do that by right currently.
Yep.
5 foot setback.
3 foot for those.
3 foot setbacks. And how tall can they be?
15, or those are 10 feet.
10 feet.
Yep.
Okay.
I do have a clarifying question. Is there a lot coverage requirement?
Yep.
And
And,
do
and
these
these
fall into
apply to
that?
that, correct. So you still have to meet your maximum lot coverage.
And that backs up to the last code we looked at for covered porches. That's the same as well.
That counts
Okay,
to it
great.
too. Yep.
Thanks.
Yeah, so it's 33% vegetation, right, that you have to maintain.
It's 30, it depends on the lot size, but it's 30% and generally 30% for lot coverage as well. So 30% minimum vegetation and 30, that's in the RMD on specific lot
Right.
sizes, but basically.
So, I mean, if you're going to put a 600 square foot building, you have a big lot. And you're
Right.
probably not going to put it 5 foot. I mean, typically you wouldn't put it 5 foot to your fence line. I mean,
You might on the side.
Good.
You might on the side. And I'm always embarrassed. I can never remember this, even though we helped create the tree code. Property owner wanting to come in and put in something like this. This doesn't then trigger, do you have 40% tree canopy coverage and now you need to
No,
plant?
because it's not a dwelling unit.
Okay.
Yep.
That might be a trade I'd be willing to make. But I don't know on its own. Feels like a big structure.
Well, it's allowed already.
It just can't have metal
Just can't be
siding.
metal.
Yep.
Painted metal?
What color?
Well, I mean, it opens another discussion. I mean, residential or non-residential, metal is a new hip siding material, so
Yep.
not new. I mean, it's
yeah, I think when this thing was probably originally conceived, well, I think maybe when we got into the ADU, we had a big, long discussion about what is an ADU, what isn't an ADU, blah, 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 blah. But what I think people envisioned is the old slapped up metal barn.
sure.
And I'm assuming that these prefabricated would be a little bit better looking, at least.
Not all of them
Not always.
probably, but some of them.
I just have this vision of the wind blowing and the metal
Clank.
siding clanging back and forth and clanging back and forth and, I don't know. I'm also very laissez-faire in what people can do on their property, so as I tell my wife, don't worry about what our neighbors are doing, just control what we're doing, so.
Thanks for clarifying, like, we can already do it. The question is really the metal.
Metal.
The metal.
That's the question. Yep.
Any other questions, thoughts, comments on this topic? Again, you've received some marginally helpful
We're
feedback.
gonna just bring it back to exactly the way we presented it
At some point, we'll need to take a position on it.
I'm not quite sure if we're like 1 out of 6 so far, or if we're.
Yeah, we're not bad.
These are,
pretty
we're
well.
not high-fiving down this road real quick, but.
Just
Right.
not as fun as parks.
Okay, let's see how we do with cottages, some cottage clusters. Okay. So we are proposing, so let me back up. So cottage clusters in the RMD zone are not permitted to be attached. They have to be detached cottages. They are permitted to be attached in the RHD zone. So we've had some cottage clusters come through for pre-app conferences, and we wanted to workshop this with the commission to see what you think, and allow for attached cottages in the RMD zone, limited to 3 attached in a section. The individual size standards for the dwellings would still remain, the 900 square feet. So each individual dwelling unit is still going to be smaller, but the structure could have up to 3 of them connected. What we are hearing is that, and this applies a little bit more to some of the larger lots that can have multiple cottage clusters on them. It's a more efficient way of constructing them. So we have one in particular project that is trying to be affordable, like actually affordable, and being able to build them as connected or attached units is helping it pencil out from a construction standpoint. So the proposal is to allow up to 3 attached cottages in the RMD zone and limit the number of attached cottages in the RHD, or the high density zone, to 4. We actually don't have a limitation in the RHD zone. We realize we allow them to be attached and we don't have a number. So we wanted to make sure that we had a number in there, but limit it to 4, because if you're 5 or more, then it starts to feel like a multi-unit development, even though it's, because 5 or more units is multi-family in our code. So we need to make sure that it's not that. Here are a couple of examples.
Thank you so much.
See, it's sort of like a park. Of some pictures of what we've seen as attached. The picture from the left is Cully Green, up in Northeast. And so those cottages are, I think they're 2s and 3s as they are attached. And then the picture on the right is a rendering of a proposal and there is a space in between a couple of these, but these are 2s. These are attached cottages in kind of like a duplex cottage kind of scenario. But that's the proposal for cottage clusters, is to allow attached cottages.
So I'm sorry, Barry, can you explain, right? So the maximum size of a cottage cluster is 900 square feet.
Cottage.
Of a cottage.
Correct, yes.
Inside the cottage cluster is 900 square feet.
Yep.
And what you're saying is that we can divide that 900 square feet up into 3, or you can build a 2,700 square foot building and divide it up.
Yes.
The latter.
The latter, so that each individual dwelling unit is limited in size, but that you could put 3 of them together.
I'm having a hard time trying to realize why those would not then fall into a triplex or a duplex or some sort of standard.
Because you would have, for example, but they're still being built, the site is being built as a cottage cluster, so there's a green, there are numerous cottage dwellings, around, so there's a limit of 12, in a cottage cluster. So a triplex is just 3 units on 1 lot, period.
With the same setback standards
Right.
that apply to other
Yeah.
housing types, but cottage clusters have their unique site design standards.
And there's multiples of them. So the way our code is written, that if it isn't a triplex, because if it were a triplex, you could only have literally 3 dwelling units on 1 lot. But a cottage cluster is a collection of these cottages. Some of them might be attached, some of them might be detached, but it's up to 12, and they're around a green that is specifically sized. They have different setbacks where they are. So they're designed as a collective around a green. A triplex doesn't have any of those requirements.
Kind of like if you look at
Yeah.
the pictures, right? So they're designed to have this green space in the center of it, and it's very specifically prescribed as to what that should look like.
Does that help?
Yeah, well, or I could just build row houses with greens in the middle of it, put my access to the backside of it and call it a cottage cluster, and take advantage of the new rules instead of actually doing the right thing and developing the lot the way it should be.
I'm not sure if I'm following that. I mean, yeah, you could do row houses with, you know, all the front yards and back
Right.
access way or something.
All the front yards facing each other with a green space, call it a cottage
No,
cluster.
you wouldn't be able to configure the site, probably.
You're not allowed to do that
And-
with standards.
And townhouses have to have frontage
Right.
on a public street, so. they can do
Right,
it.
so I'm avoiding that front yard, that public street. I'm gonna call it a cottage cluster. Right, and I just do a series of sets of threes, just like that one is, but then I turn it around and face each other.
Yep.
And then I just have the access to the back. Or, because of our state legislators, I don't even have to put in any parking, so I can just have them park on the street.
Commissioner Hamer, order.
I just want to make sure that my biggest worry is that we drain, right, the purpose of the cottage cluster, right, that we're going to end up getting a whole bunch of development that our rules are going to call cottage cluster, but they're really not cottage clusters.
Well, yeah.
You understand what I mean?
I do. What I can tell you is that I'm thinking about 4 cottage clusters that we've had pre-app conferences for right now, like off the top of my head immediately. 2 of them are exactly your traditional cottage cluster. They are 6 little cottages on a lot facing each other with the little green. They're the little individual guys. The other 2, and that's what made us think about the attached. We already were allowing attached cottages in the high density zone. This is specific to the moderate density zone.
Okay.
That we have seen site plans for larger sites. One of them is almost an acre. One of them is over 2 acres that will have multiple clusters of cottages. One of them is 42 units. And so here's a cluster, here's a cluster, here's a cluster. But the way the cottage units are built, they are in 2s and they're in 3s as a way of more efficiently building them and being able to provide more units on the site, more housing. So when we looked at that and we thought, this is a reasonable way of developing this site. This makes sense. It's still meeting all what we think of as a cottage cluster, little units. It might be a bigger building, but the units are still small around a green. And it was a way of using the site in a way that provided 42 units of housing. If they were individual units, they wouldn't have been likely to have built as many.
Right,
And
but they can
so
still, but
yeah.
the rules allow them to come for a variance, correct?
Well, and that's what they would have to do. And so when we looked at this, we thought, well, is this something that we want to codify as opposed to going through a type 3 variance? That's why this was one of those examples of finding out what are people needing type 3 variances for, and is this something that we could account for in the code in a reasonable way? That's why this is here. We thought it was something that was worth talking about. Is that a type 3 variance kind of request, or is it something that the code should accommodate?
And have you seen this type of accommodation affecting density at all in the moderate level?
Well, there is no maximum density for middle housing. So when you ask in fact, I just want to understand what you mean by that.
That's exactly it.
There isn't a number.
I
So,
appreciate that.
yeah,
Thanks. Yep.
yeah. Yep. So, yeah,
Look, I'm going to let my old man river
there we go.
crying thing come in. And so what happened, I know. For you millennials, what happens is
I'm not millennial either.
we're building these in residential areas where the residential areas are used as single-family housing and not large development. So what we're really doing is that we're giving the okay to maximize out the amount of density that is going to be able to be made on the site at a more economical rate, which would then probably ensure that, which then adds more density in these neighborhoods. And I know that my neighbors and my NDA and other NDAs have still trepidations over the amount of density that is coming through. And so this is one of these old man, maybe I can't see the flying cars, maybe I can't do the other things, but it's one of those deals.
No, for the record, nobody talks about flying cars tonight. We're not going to talk about flying cars. I appreciate that, Commissioner Hamer. I think I understand the kind of community concerns on change and density. I hear that. And I think we've also heard very clearly from community members concerns about affordability.
Yeah.
And knowing that these smaller units, you know, a cottage being limited to 900 square feet. The first house my wife and I bought was 887 square feet. That was what we could afford and started with, and we were fortunate to be able to sell that place and move here to Milwaukie. But that was a critical opportunity for us. And I think one of the challenges is in the market, a lot of that housing isn't getting built. And, you know, what is getting built is some of the big $750,000, $800,000 houses for sale a few blocks away from me right now. And those certainly, you know, there's certainly a market for that, but that's not the first time home buyer. That's not, you know, our residents who are renting right now.
On a downsize.
Seniors wanting to downsize. So to me, I think this makes a lot of sense. I might even be willing to think about, you know, going from 3 to 4 in the RMD zone. I think you'd probably run into a lot of configuration issues as the limiting factor there.
Yeah.
But that's just some of my own thoughts on that. I don't know if anybody else wants to comment on this before we move on to the next topic.
I love it. I think that this is great. This is a great change. I'm glad to see us add more flexibility to accommodate cottages because they are going to be one of the more affordable types that can be produced new. So thank you for this.
I would also agree with that sentiment.
All right, well, shall
Okay.
we?
Old man River loses again.
We haven't lost yet. This is just a work session.
The last one.
All right.
Okay.
We save the best.
Yeah, I'm going to try to explain this. This was Brett's change to the EV infrastructure requirements. So the proposal is to revise the parking code language that we already have, that was already passed, but the
We
idea.
just did. We're
that we
trying to
just
fix
did,
something
right.
that we overlooked, just to
Exactly.
be clear.
To clarify that the new requirements, I'm reading right word for word because I don't want to get it wrong, that the new requirements for for EV charging infrastructure applies when new parking spaces are constructed and the new or existing use involves a building. That's really specific. The amendments also extend the EV charging requirement to commercial parking structures as new parking spaces involving a building. And this, as I'm understanding it, it has to be new parking spaces and there has to be a new structure because the building code is where all of this is getting triggered. And so it's not just new parking spaces, there has to be a building involved in the project. And then also a clarification about parking structures, that's part of this too. I can try to answer any questions, but that's the proposed change.
Is it, and this might just be a question for Brett, is it, I know that it's new structure, but is it also kind of major renovations or anything like that? Would that?
I don't think so.
I think
Yeah,
I think
it's
you're right.
actually new build.
Yeah.
There has to be a new
New
building.
building.
I
What's
think.
the line that says existing use involves a building?
Right.
It's the last line of the first sentence.
In the brief, in the,
Oh, that the amendments also extend the EV charging requirement to commercial parking structures? Is that what you mean?
No, I'll just read it. Well,
Are you reading in the staff report or the code?
the staff report.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Too many things.
Revise the parking code language to clarify that the new requirements for electric vehicle charging infrastructure
Applies.
apply when new parking spaces are constructed and the new or existing use involves
Of
a
the building. Well, an existing use could be building a new building
Sure.
and adding parking spaces. I
Or
think,
if there is a building already there.
correct. If there's a building already there, then nothing happens. There has to be a new commercial.
it's the construction of a new unit
Existing
and the
use
parking
involves a
that's
building.
associated with that
Yeah.
unit. That's the trigger.
Yeah.
including a
again?
parking structure.
It's the construction of a new building and the parking requirements that are associated with that building. But it's the new building is the trigger.
Right.
I'm almost positive. and
You're-
Brett could confirm
That's right.
that.
You're correct.
I'm gonna make Brett come to the hearing.
And calling
Yeah.
a parking structure a new building, but not a surface lot.
Correct. Correct. Yeah.
I
can
should have
have
been
more.
questioning the code, not the staff.
Well,
Well, fair enough. You can question either.
yeah, oh, no, absolutely. The staff report was supposed to summarize what we're doing in the code, and I asked Brett to write that for me, so I tried to clear that up because I wasn't exactly sure, so. But if there are any questions, please let me know, because I will make sure that, that I explain it better during the hearing, or certainly in the code commentary.
So we'll just have to let Brett know he gets like one demerit for
No,
making a
no,
mistake in
it's
code that was just
User error,
passed.
user error here.
Well, I'd just like to know why we don't include a surface parking lot.
I don't think it counts as a,
Well, if you build a surface parking lot just by itself, I mean, you lay out,
It's something to do with the state building code.
That's right.
That we
think
cannot require things outside of that.
yeah.
Yes.
okay.
And now, out of sheer curiosity, and apologies, Vice Chair Freeman and Commissioner Edge, but Commissioner Hemer's comment made me wonder, would we build a surface parking lot in Milwaukee today?
You
I know we
can't
have. I know we have. some.
Undoubtedly.
You can't downtown,
We can't downtown.
Right.
Okay.
but you could somewhere else. If you really wanted to, there's no real purpose to it, but
And since we're trying to move away from parking mandates and
We've got to get
restricted parking.
from surface parking lots to Commissioner Hemer's flying car
Hemer's train, rodeo, and parking
emporium.
emporium.
Yeah.
Great. Well, do we have any other comments or questions on this last Code Plus cleanup? All right. Well, if there's,
I have one that I'd like to add,
Ooh.
if I may, while we're doing this. And I want to hear my logic. So this came up, this has come up a lot when we talk about vacation rentals. And what I would like to propose is a 6-foot screen, because that's the way that we use the term in all of our dividing lots, like in between flag lots and stuff, we call it screening. A 6-foot screen between the two sides and the backyard neighbors, only up to the front of the house. So in other words, the backyard, what you would consider the backyard, and the side yard of the backyard. And here's my logic why. Is because we've all been on vacation. And nobody recognizes when you're on vacation the day or the time. So it produces a barrier from somebody in the backyard on vacation and somebody that is trying to live their normal day life, a noise resistance, right? To kind of keep that noise quieted down a little bit there. And so that if somebody's having a bonfire or something like that, it's not shining up into your window or doing those kind of things. You know, I know that Vice Chair Freeman is snickering at me and wants to throw something at me because he doesn't think fences make good neighbors. But I think in these cases, because of where people are vacationing at, right? It's around a bunch of people that are trying to live their normal day lives. And so I think a little bit of a barrier actually creates a better neighbor.
other planning commissioners, thoughts on this?
First, I would say I don't think fences create bad neighbors. I just don't think there should be an onus for vacation rentals to put them up. I would say when my kids were younger, especially my daughter, we would stay in like Airbnbs all the time just because she was running around And like, we couldn't stay in a hotel because she was just too loud in some of those places like that. So we'd always stay in like an Airbnb. We went to Hawaii a couple different times, and we were very cognizant about the time of day and affecting other neighbors and being quiet. So I think it's just on the people who are renting the properties. I think we were extra respectable because we were in like a family neighborhood and we wanted to be respectful of everybody else. So I would say we were over quiet, or trying to be over quiet anyway, because we knew there were people not on vacation who were living their normal lives. So I wouldn't be in favor of mandating some kind of screen or something like that. If they're there, fine. I like my privacy. I don't think there needs to be a heightened level of privacy from vacationers just because they're on vacation. So these people are living next to people every day. So, I don't think because you're on vacation, you get louder, stay up later, or act more obnoxious just because you're on vacation. Those are my 2 cents.
During our discussion when this came up last, I was wondering if a 6-foot fence would do much for mitigating noise, and I honestly don't see how that does a whole lot of good. I think it's more of a visual screen, and whether or not, there's a difference in use for a residential, for a vacation home. Is that an elevated use versus a residential use? I don't know if it hits that standard. And I don't know if it would get to that point where if we require this, that if we create a property that has some Frankenstein fence, looks like a compound, where if in the future the owners of the property decide to sell it and it comes back to being a residential home again, if now it looks like a compound. I don't know. I'm just a little cautious about requiring the fencing. Even a 6-foot wood fence is not unreasonable. So, but I could go either way on it.
Could be arborvitae, could be rhododendron, could be any sort of screening that we allow inside the city. It doesn't.
Commissioner Edge, any thoughts on this? You might not have been present with us, I think, on one of these last ones. Be curious if you have any reactions, though. You also
You are
might
very
be frozen.
stoic in the way that you are taking in that question.
He's thinking
I
deeply.
think
That's
you're
what he's doing.
frozen. Well,
He's in deep
maybe Commissioner Edge will come back and join us. I think I'd be supportive of this. I think for me, one of the key things that I've thought about on this is, we have this kind of requirement for flag lots. And, knowing that it's a requirement there, and I think as we've seen with our 2 vacation rental applications, it's just maybe because it is a slightly qualitatively different use, just new people kind of cycling in and out of a property, community members get concerned and they have questions. And I think this is just like a small thing that the city could do to help alleviate concerns. It's probably not going to solve everything. But I think that it provides a solution towards the concerns that we know that we're going to hear. So I think I'd be supportive of it. What's the specific language? I think we probably have landscaping requirements in our flag lot requirements that we could pull from. But yeah, I think I would be supportive, especially because some of the applicants we've seen are also like, sure, yeah, I'll do that. It doesn't seem like a major barrier there.
What would you say is the intent of screening on a flag lot?
That's a great question. I probably would have to refer to staff. I think that it gets into privacy issues of suddenly locating another dwelling behind, in someone's backyard. And so that's what I think kind of is some of the driver there. I know you live on a flag lot. I live directly next to a flag lot. And so, it's things I kind of interact with on a daily basis, especially since the required fencing no longer exists between me and my neighbor. I think about having people kind of there while I'm in the backyard. Not a big deal, but I could imagine if it was random people showing up on a regular basis, I'd probably have more concern about it than I do with my neighbors who I, make cookies for and talk with on a regular basis.
And we could have a discussion on this for a long time.
Yeah.
You could throw it the other direction in that maybe if screening isn't required, it cuts down on hooliganism because there's eyes on the street mentality that, my neighbors can see what's going on back here, so I better fly straight.
That's a good point.
Just to add to discussion.
Yeah. Well, we'll let you all take this as a potential code cleanup plus item. And
Well, I would use the same language as the flag lot, the screening, whatever that means. Because I think it means fence and it means landscaping and,
you can figure out if it happens here or if it happens in one of the next cleanups or something like that. So
We'd probably put it in this one. I mean, we can bring it back to this one for sure, because it's just a small little surgical fix that we've had some experience with lately, so.
great. Well, if there's nothing else, appreciate the time. It was almost as fun as parks. The images at the end were riveting though. And we can move on to 8.0, Planning Department and Commission, other updates. Are there any other items for discussion? I'd say before we get to Commissioner Hemer's advertisement of the evening, maybe just a reminder for our captive audience out there that we're recruiting for boards and commissions, as we said at the start of the meeting. You can learn more online, and I'll hand it over to you now.
well, and since we're not going to see everybody in March, watch the city calendar for all the great events that are going to be coming up, since I won't have time to use the commercial space. So watch that calendar coming up, and don't forget that April is Earth Month Day, so that event will be coming up as well. So Milwaukie Historical Society, along with its partner city of Milwaukie, Ledding Library, and Willamette Falls Studios are proud to present the Ledding Library Lecture Series tomorrow night, 6 p.m. Join us at the Ledding Library for The Counselors. Come and explore the ins and outs, the good and the bad, the successes that counselors have shaped Milwaukee's past and future. Our special guests are counselors Abna from 17 to 20, Heisey from 18 to 2022, and Parks from 15 to 20. The program is designed as a casual conversation with audience participation discussing one of the most influential councils in Milwaukee history. The program includes a special presentation by Councilor Casarbati, former planning commissioner, and a council history lesson by our great city recorder, Scott Stauffer. If you cannot make it in person, join us on Zoom or watch later on Comcast Channel 30 at 2 o'clock in the morning, or Milwaukee Heritage Channel on YouTube. For more information, visit Milwaukee History Museum on Facebook or the city calendar.
Fantastic. Just curious, I know we've got forecasts for future meetings. Any updates on TSP process, or I heard reference to neighborhood hubs earlier, where what are some of the things that are coming down the pipeline a little bit?
The TSP scope is finally with the DOJ. It's been shipped out of the ODOT building, so that's something. So we could hear tomorrow, we could hear 4 months from now. So, but boy, we'll be ready when it comes. So we're excited about that. And then Vera and we've all been working hard on kicking off the Neighborhood Hubs project. So we've hired a consultant, and we've actually had our first kickoff meeting. So we're gonna start coming out to the NDAs. We talked about coming out and getting on folks' schedule in May to give everybody an update of kind of like, what is the scope of the project and what's the timeline and when will there be opportunities? So we've got that underway and we'll be working on that for the rest of the year and possibly into a little bit into next year.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
I think as you're getting that kicked off, I look forward to tuning into some of that and would remind us to let's look at the zoning map as part of that conversation.
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
Great.
that's all we're looking at.
It's all
Looking at this. We are. That's the zoning map a lot.
great. Any forecasts for future meetings? Not meeting on the 14th,
Not meeting on the 14th.
not meeting on the 28th.
Right now, no, not on the 28th. We don't have anything on the 11th either, but potentially something on the 25th.
After our taxes are due.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We had a crazy couple of years with all this development that came in, and it's a little quiet at the moment because we have all of these things burbling, right? We've had tons of pre-application conferences. So we're just like, at any moment, we're going to start getting stuff. But then a lot of the things, they're not requesting variances. They're just going to come straight through building permits. So it'll be an interesting time. We're in this learning time and seeing how all of this is actually going to get built out.
So that would be house coding codes plus.
But there are a couple that are in their TIS process right now, but that, will likely be coming here. So they're just taking some time because they need to get the TIS done before they can, the transportation impact study, before they can.
Well,
the
we kind of
application
knew this would
together,
happen with all of the new code. It's kind of like everybody's figuring out how it works. And there's a lot of back and forth and a lot of conversations about, well, can we do this? Can we do that? And so we're kind of working through that right now with folks.
But we do have our first cottage cluster has submitted for building permits. So that's the first middle housing project that has actually submitted for permits.
That's the one kind of off 42nd
That
and
one's
Olsen.
it's on 40th, actually. The one on Olsen hasn't submitted permits
Oh,
yet,
okay.
but the one on 40th has.
And it's a
40th
6th
and
unit.
Six cottages.
What's the other cross street?
Yep.
Somewhere on 40th.
I can email that to you too.
I forgot where there's a large enough lot.
Maybe just another kind of quick update. Hillside Plan Development, the county and their developer had a community meeting last week on the start of Snowpocalypse. They shifted seamlessly to Zoom. I attended, found it very insightful, got to see kind of what phase one is looking like, very similar to some of the things that we talked about, more advanced renderings, preservation of one of the large trees that's profiled really nicely kind of within the built environment. Some of the pedestrian walkways, not with combo of streets. So it looks very interesting. I'll be curious to see how they get everything done or don't within their 7-year time horizon. So they might be coming back to you all for extensions at some point. But yeah, seemed like things were moving along well, and they were very responsive to community members showing up with questions. Mayor Beatty actually attended for part of the session as well. So it was really good.
Cool.
Yeah.
And I also hear that the Rusk Road, well, I call it the Rusk Road project, extended out their deal.
They did.
And so are they going to continue with the senior living?
Yes, as far as we know.
I think they're coming in with permits. I mean,
Yeah.
they're really close.
Yeah,
Oh, they're really
They're
close.
actually
Okay.
moving now.
good.
but they needed the extension too, because they were up against.
Right, they were up against 10.
So that is actually, it's moving, starting to move.
Good, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
I will say I noticed a provision in the Hillside Plan Development, which is a function, I think, of plan developments. If construction doesn't happen within a year of issuance, we can actually invite them back to give us an update on their work. Not that we need to do that, but maybe I was thinking about it with the Rusk Road. It was like, do we have anything buried in our conditions of approval? And unfortunately, we didn't. So, yeah, but it sounds like we're getting there.
Yeah, that project had a lot of front end stuff that the plan development code doesn't anticipate when you have, the housing authority is who got the plan development approval, but then they still needed to go out and actually get the developer. And that took almost a year to do. And, and all the HUD funding and so they've expended a lot of resources already. And so, we've acknowledged that within sort of their timeline because it's it's just
a long
not,
process.
it's just not possible.
It's a major project.
Yeah, yeah.
Probably one of the biggest ones we'll have in a while.
Yes.
Have had in a while and will have in a while. So, well, if there's nothing left, Commissioner Losfeld isn't here, so we should really close out before 9 o'clock. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Commissioner Freeman. We'll see you later.
See ya.
Thank you.